Aromyx is a company that's using the core biotechnology platform that we've developed to be able to provide actionable insights to our customers around measurements of taste and smell. So we know, the industry has had lots of challenges over the years dealing with low quality data coming from human tasting panels, and what we are using instead is the core biology of the human nose and tongue to be able to provide better insights and measurements into how consumers interact with different tastes, flavors, and scents in the products that they deal with every day. My name is Josh Silverman. I'm CEO of Aromyx. As the CEO, I manage the day-to-day operations of the company. I deal with the strategy, overall approach to the business case, but I also spend a whole lot of time with the science because this is at its core a science-based company, and it's very important that we make sure that the science is what actually drives the business and not necessarily the other way around.
The sense of smell in general, olfaction, is one of the last frontiers in sensory neuroscience, I should say. It's a pretty hard field to be in. My name is Sandeepa Dey, and I'm helping with a lot of the platform development work and investigation of the cell biology of the olfactory and taste receptors in Aromyx.
My job is to basically serve as a liaison between the science team and the sales team. That's kind of my main responsibility. My name is Ilya Kolb, and I am the Senior Project Manager here at Aromyx.
The automation process of Aromyx is unique because nobody has ever automated these types of processes before. Nobody's ever taken this combination of cells and these combination receptors and tested them in such high throughput. This offers benefits to perfumists and flavorists because it gives them a platform to consistently test their samples without having to worry about testing panels being different, without having to worry about timelines and getting people in a room together. I'm Brad Meyer. I'm the Director of Automation here at Aromyx.
Aromyx is a company that's using the core biotechnology platform that we've developed to be able to provide actionable insights to our customers around measurements of taste and smell. So we know, the industry has had lots of challenges over the years dealing with low quality data coming from human tasting panels because humans provide very subjective responses. And what we are using instead is the core biology of the human nose and tongue to be able to provide better insights and measurements into how consumers interact with different tastes, flavors, and scents in the products that they deal with every day. In the way that people were describing colors, 100 years ago, and only, the question of always, how do you tease apart a rainbow, and can you actually ensure that, you as a different viewer are seeing the same colors that I am? And there was always this question of, is this perception really unique and quantifiable, or is it all completely individualized and we all just sort of agree on a common language? And it turns out, once we understood how the human eye works and how the receptors in the eyes pick up particular colors and how the brain then translates those receptors, we're able to come up with universal codes, and now we can create numerical quantification of every single color. We can email those color codes to someone on the other side of the world, and we can ensure they're actually seeing and perceiving the same colors that we as the designer want them to see. And this is, again, this is a solved problem for colors and vision and video. This is a solved problem for sound and audio and music, but it's very hard to understand for taste and flavor, and has been for many years. So this is the core challenge that we are trying to solve by providing that quantitative insight into how people interact with taste and flavor, and how that interactions are then translated into preference and consumer choice.
I think one analogy that can really help understand kind of what Aromyx is trying to do is Photoshop. Everybody's familiar with Photoshop. It's basically a tool that people use to take a picture and then do either slight or major modifications to it to reveal something completely new. And that's really, I think, where we're trying to go, is we want to be kind of the Photoshop, but for smell and taste. And the way that we're going about it is we want to be able to, to get there, we need to have a database of basically what are all the possible ingredients that somebody would want to use, what are all of the receptors that are activated by those ingredients. And then once we have that, we'll be able to, just like in Photoshop, you could say, okay, add a little bit more yellow color or blue color. We should be able to tell the companies that we work with, oh, you should add a little bit more of this ingredient or that ingredient, which I think would be very powerful for them.
It's a whole different world out there. Like the olfactory subgenome is just so different from person to person. It's like a little brain sitting right here that's constantly deciding what are the inputs that go into your brain. Our noses, the human noses, they're packed with all of these sensory neurons. We call them olfactory sensory neurons that express a family of 400 different olfactory receptors. Each neuron will express only one receptor. And the way they function is anytime that you breathe in, all of the smells from the environment are going into your nose and they hit the receptors. So if a receptor is recognizing the odor molecules, it's going to bind it and then send a signal to the brain that tells the brain that the receptor is seeing a molecule. And it's complex. It's all pretty complex because, it's a limited set of 400 receptors, and that is being used to detect and discriminate millions of different odors from the environment. So, for example, when you're smelling coffee, a particular subset of olfactory receptors are going to get fired. And when you're detecting smelling a perfume, then a different set, a subset of olfactory receptors are going to get fired. Now there may or may not be some overlap depending on how similar or different the odors are. But you can imagine that using this sort of a combinatorial mechanisms of receptor identity and intensities, relative intensities, even though the number of receptors is limited to 400, the possible combinations are practically infinite, right? And using those infinite combinations, like the human nose is empowered to detect and discriminate so much that is going on in our chemical environment.
Aromyx really will sit in between what the cells in the nose and the tongue are signaling that they are seeing and what the brain is interpreting. So what we're trying to do is jump in the middle and pick up a lot of that information and display it to you, because obviously we cannot really at this point tap into individual brain signals about each flavor and smell, but we are able to actually say, hey, this cell did respond to that, and this cell has this receptor on it, and so we know that there is a signal there. When we talk about what we smell and we look at other analytical chemistry techniques, we can sort of see what's in that composition, right? Whereas with the Aromyx technology that we're scaling up with automation, we're able to see what the cells are seeing, what the cells are signaling to the brain. And I think there's very important instances where we might be able to introduce a flavor or a smell to a cell, and the cell might not care. Sometimes biology doesn't really care. Well, other times it would care, and so we want to be able to elucidate those differences to be able to explain them to flavorists and perfumists. What is innocuous? What is actually causing changes in their product?
So a core problem that flavorists and fragrance developers have at the moment is trying to predict how consumers at large are going to interact with the products that they design. So pretty much all flavorists and fragrance, they're designing products that they think smell good, that they think taste good. But we know that humans are highly variable. Consumers do not have the same perception as the fragrance developers, and oftentimes we see that things that performed very well in the lab, performed very well in their in-house testing, then just do not succeed in the marketplace because consumers are not interacting with the flavors in the same way. And so our ability to identify what those fragrances are, how the ingredients are being combined and developed, and then predicting how is a consumer, and generic consumer going to interact with that, but then also how are specific demographics within those consumers? Are you going to actually target the age groupings, the ethnicities, the geographies that the fragrance developers really want to go after, and making sure that the things that they measure in the lab actually are predictive of the consumer experience at large. We solve the core problem of understanding what the consumer likes and doesn't like through using the underlying biology. So we know humans are highly variable. How people react to specific scents can vary based on ethnicity, age, culture, geography, all of these different factors. But at the core, how people interact with a taste or flavor is based on the receptors in the nose and tongue. So when you smell a perfume, you drink a cup of coffee, there are specific chemicals and ingredients in that product that interact with the receptors in your nose and tongue that send that signal to your brain to tell you this is, a great perfume or, a spoiled cup of coffee. And by understanding how those receptors are interacting with the particular ingredients of the product, and then how those receptors vary within the target population, we can make that connection from the actual product and the actual ingredient list to what the consumers are going to love.
I feel like Aromyx can really unleash the full potential of perfumers and flavorists, and that's just because the tools that they have right now are really insufficient for what the market is demanding. I think right now the perfumers and flavorists are still using their tongue and their nose to try to make something that 100 million people will buy and like, but that's not sufficient. And I think we know that it's not sufficient. And so I think with our technology, the way that our assay is set up is essentially a case where we have 100 million trained perfumers just sitting there waiting for the specimen to come along, and we quantitatively can read out exactly what they're saying to us.
Measuring taste and smell is just so difficult because it's this huge multi-gene family, 400 different receptors, right? Capturing various angles of it, the signaling angles, the genetic angles, just the diversity of these receptors. That to me is one of the biggest challenges. Finding quantitative, reproducible, replicable methods for all of these diverse products. Those are the challenges. Our lab can really help perfumers and flavorists by doing these measurements in a very quantitative, replicable way, and by including the genetic diversity angle of it. Like they don't have to go to different geographic locations to do these measurements, like the French market, the English market, the Indian market, the Chinese market. Like if you want to measure, like it's right here in our labs. We just clone the genes and we can measure it. It's so easy.
So the benefit of Aromyx technology to flavorists and perfumers is to allow them to move outside of their comfort zone, to be able to move away from a slow trial and error based product development cycle to a targeted data-driven product development cycle. And on top of that, being able to use that information to actually communicate these benefits directly to their consumers. And we see this over and over again where a consumer goes into a perfume store, they try to smell 4, 5, 6 different perfumes, they become worn out, they don't find the thing they like, and they just walk out. We can help those consumers actually find the products that they like with confidence, and to be able to match the great products that our perfumist customers are developing to the consumers that are actually going to love those products the most.
The automation process of Aromyx is unique because nobody has ever automated these types of processes before. Nobody's ever taken this combination of cells and these combination receptors and tested them in such high throughput. This offers benefits to perfumists and flavorists because it gives them a platform to consistently test their samples without having to worry about testing panels being different, without having to worry about timelines and getting people in a room together. I love my job because I get to create different types of automation solutions to help individual scientists perform small tasks as well as put together end-to-end solutions for our entire assay.
Biology is essential to Aromyx because we are leveraging the millions of years of evolution in the human nose to be able to turn this into actionable insights for our customers. Our data allows these perfumists, flavorists, fragrance developers to actually create better products and to target them to consumers in a smarter, more predictive manner than they could ever do before. I'm really looking forward to tasting and smelling the products that the perfumists and flavorists are creating with the Aromyx technology today.
So welcome to this exciting webcast on strengthening confidence in fragrance and flavor decisions. Today we have the brilliant team from Aromyx, and I'm excited to delve deep with them on taste and smell. But first, let's do a round of introductions.
Hi, my name is Josh Silverman. I'm CEO of Aromyx.
My name is Ilya Kolb, and I'm the Senior Project Manager. My job is to manage the relationships with our clients.
My name is Brad Meyer. I'm the Director of Automation. I bring in new technologies and robotics.
Hi, my name is Elise Kern. I'm our Senior Vice President of Data and Insights, and I focus on our engagement with retailers and CPGs that primarily leverage our data for insights.
Hi, my name is Sandeepa De, and I'm the Director of Biotech Development. I'm leading a lot of the early discovery work around chemosensory receptors.
Sandeepa, can you tell us how Aromyx's technology works?
So in the Aromyx technology, we are using the smell and receptors that are expressed in the human nose and tongue. So in the human nose and tongue, these receptors are expressed, and their jobs is to detect and discriminate thousands of molecules that are going into our noses when we are breathing or when we are eating or drinking. And different patterns of receptors firing will send the information to our brain how what we are eating is perceived, right? So, eating or smelling is perceived. So the perception of a perfume has a certain pattern of activity that the brain is seeing versus a pattern, of a specific receptor firing pattern for coffee versus wine versus some recycled plastic. So in the Aromyx platform, really the goal is to take these receptors from the nose and the tongue and recapitulate that sort of firing and pattern differences in the lab. And that basically enables us to replicate exactly how we anticipate the human nose and the tongue to be able to detect the food, beverages, as well as whatever we are smelling through our noses.
Elise, how do perfumers and flavorists see the data that Aromyx provides?
After we've analyzed a sample for a client, this honeycomb image is produced, which maps the response based on our analysis. The colors coordinate to a key. For a food sample, for example, this could map to sweet, salty, or other descriptors to detail how the sample is perceived to an individual consumer.
Thank you. That's a really fascinating insight. Josh, I want to turn to you. Why are companies coming to Aromyx?
So companies come to Aromyx because they're interested in getting quantitative data that describes taste and smell in a way that they've never had access to before. So historically, perfumists and flavorists have been limited by the quality of the data they can get from human sensory panels and the subjective nature of those descriptions that make it very hard to do product design in anything besides a trial and error based formulation work. So our data allows them to make better quality decisions, both in terms of formulation, product development, as well as marketing directly to consumers.
And can you talk a bit more about what kind of problems you think companies are facing?
Face a number of problems that have to deal with a lack of good quality data. The real problems they face on a day-to-day basis involve quite a bit of personalization to the particular consumer and identifying what individual consumers like or don't like about their products. But our customers are also working on replacing unsustainable or unhealthy ingredients in their current formulations while still trying to achieve the taste and flavor and sense that the consumers are really looking to enjoy in their products.
Thanks, Josh. That actually leads me into my next question. So we're living in unprecedented times and we're no longer able to lean on human tasting panels. What are some of the ways that you've helped companies pivot in their innovation and R&D goals?
So our tools have helped a lot of customers move away from those human tasting panels to overcome those limitations. So as you mentioned, it's just simply difficult today to have that many people in a room to be able to actually taste or smell a product and provide data. On the other hand, our products, our tools are able to allow our customers to get better quality data much faster than they can otherwise get from those panels, as well as being able to interpret the data in a more general way. So rather than being tied to the specific people who would be in the room, we can make predictions from the tests in our lab to groups of consumers all around the world, and do this in a much faster and more economical way for our customers.
Thanks, Josh. Those are great insights into how companies are leveraging the technology to improve their products. Ilya, let's talk about the data. How is what Aromyx provides different from the data that most companies have access to today?
So I think the data that most companies are working with these days, first and foremost, is probably the human testing panel data that Josh was talking about. And then kind of on the other side of that, you have basically quantitative tools such as mass spectroscopy that basically gives you just an idea of, okay, what exact chemicals are in a particular perfume or food and so on. And I think by themselves, those tools are really good and kind of they do the job that they're supposed to, but they're kind of limited. So Josh talked about the limitations of human taste panels. One of the limitations of mass spec is while it's very sensitive and it can tell you, exactly kind of what percentage of, a certain molecule may be in your ingredient, it actually won't tell you exactly what things are going to smell and taste like, right? I mean, it's going to give you a readout of, the ingredients present, but it still isn't good enough to tell you what customers are going to, customers are going to like smell and taste, how they're going to smell and taste it. So that's kind of, I think, where our technology really comes in, is because we use the human olfactory and taste receptors that we're actually using every day. And because of that, I think the data that we get out is potentially a lot more valuable.
So Sandeepa, how is what Aromyx provides different from the data that most companies have access to today?
So in addition to what Josh and Ilya just said, what I would say is the data is quantitative and reproducible, and that is the most important thing, and is very science-based, not variable person to person who's doing the experiment or tasting it, not like that, but it's like a very reproducible data set. Every time you test the sample, we would do it the exact same way. And then you can make quantitative comparisons between this and that, and say exactly this is how product X is different than product Y. So in addition to that, my favorite thing that we do very, very easily is all of this demographic and genetic testing. It is like literally having the noses from all over the world in our lab. In literally just DNA constructs, which again you can reproducibly test, and not necessarily having to go all the way to different countries or different geographic locations or demographics to do the testing with real people.
Fantastic. I mean, that certainly makes this data really unique. Now that we've touched on that, let's deep dive into specific use cases. Ilya, can you talk us through a study?
Sure. So one of our partners came to us a few months ago, and they had a problem where they had a sugary beverage that was out on the market that was very popular, but because of kind of where consumer preferences are headed these days, they wanted to develop a sugar-free or reduced sugar version of that beverage. And they developed they made some attempts at doing this, and they basically found that when they did small taste panels, the taste panels didn't really like the drink very much. They said it was not as, it didn't taste as sweet, didn't taste as good as the original. And so they came to us and asked if we can basically try to quantify the differences between the full sugar beverage and the reduced sugar beverage. So that's what we did in our receptor assay, and we basically tested both beverages side by side. And what we found was that there were actually several receptors that were being activated by the full sugar beverage that were not being activated by the reduced sugar beverage. So what that told us is that we were able to actually see what were the underlying causes of why their consumers did not really like the less sugary drink as much as the full one. So once we figured this out, then it was just a task of going to our database and seeing, okay, what particular ingredients can we use in order to kind of recapitulate the taste and smell of the full sugar beverage. So that's what we did. We basically found a couple of ingredients that really that activated those receptors. We gave them to the company, and then they were able to basically reformulate the drink, and actually got some results that said that their consumers actually preferred or really liked the reduced sugar beverage even more.
And I think this is actually really important to highlight because, one, we see that context really matters. And what we're seeing is that the odor molecules, the aroma molecules that are part of that flavor, are being affected by the sweetener. And most companies, when they think about, we're just going to remove the sugar and throw in an artificial sweetener, and then the customers will, taste the same thing. In reality, that doesn't happen, right? The artificial sweetener, even though it tastes sweet, you're losing the effects of these other flavor molecules, which are really important for how we as consumers actually experience that beverage. And so our ability to actually measure these differences, again, it's not just remove sugar, throw in artificial sweetener and call it a day. We can help our customers actually find products that the consumers will love just as much as the original.
And I would actually just add on to that I think, the chemical space is extremely vast, right? Like, we know there's some artificial sugars and sweeteners that have been discovered, but we know almost for a fact that there's probably way more out there. There's probably millions and billions of molecules out there that have yet to be discovered. And I think what we want to provide is kind of a high throughput way to be able to test those things and really come up with products that don't require millions of people to taste things. And I think that's kind of what the platform provides.
Thank you, Ilya. Thank you, Josh, for those insights. Ilya, can you talk about a recent plant-based project?
Sure. So this is another customer of ours who are, they're a big company that really wants to get into the alternative meat space and plant-based meat space. And so they came to us with several samples that they wanted us to test. One was basically a whey-based protein. And there were two more. So those were the plant-based proteins, the chickpea and lentil. And they were generally just interested in, can we actually detect using our platform a difference in perception between the whey and the plant-based proteins? And so what we were able to find is that indeed, both on the smell side as well as the taste side, we actually saw that there were reproducible differences in the perception between in the signaling that translates over to the perception between whey and the other proteins. So generally speaking, the characteristics that we found with whey were kind of more pleasant, a little bit, less bitter, whereas the plant-based proteins were found to be kind of a little bit more bitter. And so what that kind of told us is that, again, this is kind of a roadmap that we can now use to help these companies actually come up with better versions of the plant-based proteins. So what can they add to actually perhaps mask that flavor of the bitterness? And so that's kind of what this proof of concept project was about.
So now let's segue into another part of the consumer lifecycle that Aromyx's data and insight helps with, driving e-commerce. Elise, could you tell us some more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So imagine you're a consumer, you're walking into a store the size of Sam's Club or Costco that is just filled wall to wall with wine. And it seems like a shopper's paradise because you have endless choice. But the challenge is, how do you make a decision among that endless choice? Because you can't try every bottle, you can't smell every bottle, and you don't know what they taste like. So, what we are doing is applying the science that we have to enable those retailers and manufacturers to have detailed factual information about the wines or the perfumes or the beers that they sell so that they can make recommendations to consumers about ones that they will actually like. Because you don't want your consumers to be burned by coming in and sampling a product and not liking it and not coming back. You're much better suited understanding the details of the product and recommending to them something that you know they're going to like based on our knowledge of the product and our understanding of their personal preferences. We can marry those two together to provide recommendations to your consumers.
So talking about these recommendations, can you tell us how is Aromyx actually doing that?
Yes, so we're very excited to be partnering with Estee Lauder to roll out a new innovation in the coming months on their luxury fragrance collection. So this technology is going to really enhance the consumer experience in a completely new way and change the way they shop for fragrance.
We can now apply this technology to a wide range of other products because these flavor profiles and preferences and fragrance preferences are present in things like wine, coffee, and many other consumer products.
Like what makes the recommendation engine really unique is that, like we are actually using the receptor data, which nobody has ever done before, right? Like people, recommendation engines are not new, but I think what is new is the fact that we can take the kind of traditional recommendation engine and then augment it with the information that we get from our screen. And that is what like creates that idea of being able to recommend perfumes to people, not just based on kind of what your neighbor said or your friend said, but based on science.
Brad, can you tell us about scaling up the automation in Aromyx and how that plays into the data and insight Elise and the team were talking about?
Absolutely. At Aromyx, we want to be able to test a number of consumer products so that we can have data to use these recommendation engines that Elise has been talking about. So if we're to partner with large scale companies that have tens of thousands of products, we need to have the capacity in our testing facilities to actually execute those experiments. And that's where our robotics and our automation technologies come in. Once we're able to measure the receptor activation for each of these products, we can then use those data to go into the database to help make recommendation engines for different arrays of consumer products, from cosmetics, perfumes, wines, beers, milks, cheeses, roughly anything. And I think that really will help the e-commerce trend where people are shopping from home, but doing so at risk. And we want to help de-risk that. So if we can say, hey, I like cheese, great. Well, then maybe our recommendation can say, you might also like another cheese or any other type of product out there. So at Aromyx, we are seeing huge increases in customer demand, needing us to increase our capacity. Through those means, we've been bringing in some robotics and advanced technologies to increase the amount of data we can generate for our customers. Those data ultimately do end up in some of these databases that power the recommendation engines that Elise was talking about. And ultimately, these data are what we give to our customers when they have specific projects for us. Say they want to test 1,000 samples. We will need to increase these testing capacities to give them that data.
So I hope the people have learned a little bit about Aromyx technology, some of the applications that they can use it for, and I hope it spurred their own thoughts about how this could be applied to their own product development cycles.
I hope that the people watching here today were able to see that a scientific approach can be taken to quantifying things that we did not think could be quantified and measured before.
I hope people watching today have come to understand that there is a new tool in the toolkit that can augment and potentially even build upon their data stack that they have for creating new consumer products.
I hope that people watching us have learned today that there is a way to recapitulate the sense of taste and smell that is constantly going on in our noses and our tongues,
there is a way to recapitulate that and reproduce that in our labs in a very reproducible and quantifiable way.
Hope people watching today have come to learn that there is a rich new source of data that can supplement the consumer insights that you may already have access to, so that you can make richer product recommendations to your consumers and grow your business.
Thank you to everyone who's joined us for this webinar today. I'm sure the examples and insights from our panel have prompted some questions. Please send in any questions you have and join us now live for the Q&A.